Hey everybody, welcome back to Odd and Untold. This week I'm welcoming author Greg Walter, and he's led a very interesting life. He's a Coast Guard Merchant Marine veteran. He's an author. He's a research historian. He works with maps, and I read that you work with you do a lot of work in Crater Lake up there in Oregon too. Correct, Greg?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, so let's jump right in. I know off air you were sort of telling me you have some stories, and I know you've written a few books. So where would you like to start today?
Sure. I can jump in, I guess, from the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so I'm Greg Walter, author of my new book, Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds, and it's out on Amazon. I also have a website, theridgewalkers.com, and I have been involved with this as far as process of writing and trying to, I decided to tell my story as a sci-fi magic realism, even though the elements of my story are true, and all through the book there's a lot of true things that happened to me. And also friends of mine that like a friend of mine is a well, he's a professional treasure hunter, and
Nice.
so he's been all over the world. He works mainly with long range location equipment, and so he can zero in from about anywhere between 10 to 20 miles out and narrow it into within a 10 by 10 area where to search. And then from there dig up whatever you're looking for. Everybody loves the gold stories.
Oh
And
yeah.
probably his most popular one he likes to tell is the ones about the Philippines and going over there where they buried tons and tons of gold in like abandoned mine shafts or caves of some sort. And that was the Japanese during the occupation. And then from there, it's just a story of thievery and lies. I mean, it's just horrendous. But anyways, that's as an aside. Um, my story, what I guess we're gonna focus on today is gonna be around an encounter I had with a cryptid back in the mid 1990s. And I was at a time in my life where I was transitioning from working on fishing boats into something a little bit more domesticated. And so it was at that time of transition, and I didn't really recognize it at the time. I did a pack trip, and it was about a 60-mile 8-day or 9-day trip. And in the course of that, um, I would run into this thing. I had an encounter with the fellow right here. Um, and and it profoundly changed me, and I didn't expect it to. And friends of mine looking back on it say, well, Greg, you basically went on a good old-fashioned down-to-earth spirit quest. And I wasn't really questing spirits, but that seemed to be what happened. And so as time went on, I had the story recounted to me, even though I hadn't told it to the individual, mainly tribal elders, that I explained, well, I had this encounter and this is kind of what happened, and this was roughly the area where it was, this kind of thing. And then they start telling me what happened, and that blew my mind, and then that led me into much further research. And in the course of it, I mean, I'll just give a brief overview of what that was, where basically it was like day one. I went to a place and I burned some sage, and it was considered a sacred area. I didn't know what that meant or what that was, but I burned a little bit of sage, kind of, I think they call it cry for luck.
Mhm.
And that means, that you're searching, you're open, like this, and the beings out there pick up on this. And so then the next night I went back to my truck, reloaded my pack, and took off out on the 60-mile trip. And the next night, I'm setting up my tent. I go over to this beautiful spring with water bubbling out from these big cedars. And I look down and there's this beautiful salamander. And I picked him up and held him and said, "Wow, thank you for being here." And all this. And I put him back down. And then from there, that next night, I would have this encounter. And then years later, I had a tribal elder tell me that basically the shamans, or the doctors or whatever, they go up on the ridges, and they basically do the same sorts of things that I did, and then they know they're successfully on the right path if they encounter a salamander in a spring. And
Hmm.
and that just blew my mind because I didn't mention anything about this to the fellow I was talking to. And so and then in further research of that, I dug into it, and that led me down the path of the little people, the immortals, these so to speak, they're gods, you know. And there was a book actually that my friend wrote, and this is a fellow I know from Oregon Caves, and it's called American Elves, and it's an encyclopedia of the little people based on 380 ethnic groups throughout the Western Hemisphere. Half of the book is bibliographic reference, and so this is just stuff from their ethnology, their culture, their respective belief system within their creation lore. And within all that, I dug further, and that's what led me down the path of finding out that basically what I was holding was a water baby. And these are this is the immortal, but he's shapeshifted into a salamander. I know that sounds, to me, it was just this beautiful salamander, and at the time, that's what I thought it such. And I, handled him very gingerly and put him back down in the spring and like this. But what that did was that it said, okay, thumbs up, this guy's in, and so then that next night, so here he comes, you know, um, and in normal circumstances, had I had the training, and it takes years to have the training, that ostensibly you would sing a song of introduction, and then you sing a song seeking knowledge, and the introduction is as he's approaching, he would come over, and then you exchange knowledge telepathically. But it's not really an exchange. It's more like, because they're referred to not as a Sasquatch or anything else, they're referred to as the upslope people.
Okay.
So they're the ones that teach you or instruct what's going to happen in the future. Like, for instance, there's not going to be any salmon in the river, so your tribe is going to starve unless you come up with another food source. There's a blight on the acorns. There can be different things that could happen that could disrupt your normal food chain, and for the tribe to be prepared. And that's kind of the role of the shaman, is to contain that power, take it back to the tribe for the survivability of the tribe. And so, and this is very universal, especially amongst at least like the Pacific Northwest tribal folks, and their use, and their use of this cryptid, so to speak, that aids in their survival in this otherwise can be, an inhospitable place.
Right. So can you backtrack a little bit and just tell us exactly where you were? And I mean, you don't have to tell us exactly where you were, but just the state and what you were doing out there, and exactly what you saw that kind of sparked this journey for you.
Ah, well, so I was on the borderlands, kind of between Southern Oregon, Northern California.
Uh-huh.
And I was running around in an area that was basically, I love these places that are overlooked, where they're a 4 to 6 square mile area, sometimes much larger, but they're a place that they don't have the high peaks, they don't have these pristine lakes, they might have some ponds and tarns, they're just wild forested ridgelines.
Uh-huh.
And people just don't go there because why, but to me it's like, okay, this is where I want to go. And perhaps that's the loner in me at times, to go out into those sorts of places. As far as what prompted me, like I say, I was going through some changes, and I didn't really recognize it at the time. I just saw it as, hey, let's do a pack trip, I want to go into here. And on my way up there, I'm thinking in my head, wow, what if I saw a Bigfoot? What would I do? And sometimes it's funny on how sometimes we can put these things out there. I remember my ex-wife calling it like vibrational escrow, where you put these things out there and here they come.
Right.
So, yeah. But as far as the actual physical encounter, I can get into that too.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So I wrote it up in the first part of the book. It's about a 2,200 word, spiel on what unfolded. But basically, going back to the story, so I see this salamander, I walk out to another place, and I saw this little side trail, and I knew that there was like a whole sort of a ridge line that fed out from there. And I wanted to explore it more. I just wanted to check out this area because it's tough to get into, and damned inaccessible, really. I mean, there's trails. They show these nifty little trails on the map, but the trail faded in and out. So I was dropping my pack and having to scout, find the trail, pick up my pack, go another couple hundred yards, do the same thing over and over and over again to get, just to continue on this route. But anyways, I get up to this place. It's an amphitheater, and in the amphitheater, it's sort of surrounded on like three sides, about roughly a little smaller than a football field, and it had some little ponds up at the head wall of it, and it didn't go like straight up, but it was really close, very steep, and it was like another 100 or so feet up to the top of the ridge. And so I put down my pack, set up my tent, and I'm checking this place out, and I walk up, and the other thing too I should mention was that it was a geologic contact. And geologic contacts can be very special places because you get a change of vegetation. And so in this case, it went from like dacite, granitics to serpentine. And serpentine is where you get the Darlingtonia plants. These are carnivorous plants that eat bugs and stuff. And then from there it goes into conifer forest, but scattered, nothing really too heavy. And so from there, I decided to go up to the top of the ridge just to get a view out over, and I could see a lake down the other side of this major drainage that dropped down. And I went up there, and there were some little ponds up there, probably like from snow melt, because I was in there. This was like early June. It was a blue moon. I was there at the at the rising of the full moon, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a special night. Oh boy, was it! And so at any rate, I come back down, and it gets to that time of the thin red line, but during that I decide to go, just throw some warm water over my head. So I kick up my stove and get some water going, and I walk over to this place. It looks like a little stream course, but it was just, I don't know, maybe like from heavy rains, and it just formed like that. And I looked down because I was standing on a flat rock, and there's this bare footprint. I went, okay, this is cool. But I thought very aberrant, because number one, it looked like a bare footprint. Now, what's somebody barefooted doing this far out? Like, where's their hiking boot? And then over by my tent, there were like some smeared bare footprint marks, like as though there was a fight or some kind of struggle. And I thought it was bears. And one thing that's very common in the whole Klamath Mountain complex are the bears, and I love them. They come out like clockwork to these meadows. They're eating the onions. It's the early spring, like this, and these onions, they're usually early summer. And so the bears are pretty common. So anyways, I see this footprint. I kind of froze and was going, oh, wow, okay, what's going to happen tonight? And so then I go back to my tent, and the thin red line, the sun had sank, and it was at that time, it made me think of the Carlos Castaneda stories of the time of power, in the day. That's that transition from daylight to darkness. And that time is very special. And so at any rate, but it's getting very dark. But the moon was going to be just a bright orb, but it was still rising, and it was on the other side of the ridge. So all of a sudden, I hear this crunch, this crash, crash, crash. And I look over, and I could see something moving, and then it stops up at at the head of one of the upper ponds there, these small ponds that were in the amphitheater. And it starts drinking, slurp, 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 waiting for this thing. I mean, it's like, Lord me, can I get you a taller pitcher of water?
So how was it drinking? Did it put its face in the water, or was it using its hands?
I think it put its face in the water. It was down putting its face in the water, drinking like that, because I could hear him slurping, and so I didn't hear a lot of splashing, noises or anything. And then I heard splash, 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 crash, crash, stomp, stomp. Now this thing's making its way around, and now I can kind of see this figure, definitely a biped, very athletic. And then it looks at me with these icy gray eyes. It was just cold, sharp, reading my thoughts. And, I'm holding a flashlight. I'm absolutely just frozen in fear. And I get this message in my head. It's like, don't even think about it. Like, in other words, don't even put that light on me. You know, you ain't doing that. And so I just stood there frozen. I stood my ground. I didn't back up. I didn't advance. And for me to advance, there was another little pond right by my tent, and I would have had to go wading across it to confront this thing. And I thought about it for a fleeting second, and no. And like, okay, stay here. Yeah, and so then the thing just did like a semicircle around me, and I could see it, pretty clearly, but it was dark. I mean, there was a very dark figure, with a fairly dark backdrop, but still, it was a shadowy, very swift of movement, very athletic. Just could gracefully. I mean, I had envisioned in my head that this thing could, like if a deer was standing 20 feet from him and took off at a dead run, he would have been able to catch it and kill it, no problem. And so I thought, there ain't no running away from this thing. And so it continued down the hill and just kept going. And moving quickly. I mean, stepping like this, but much thinner than this, but muscled. I could tell that this thing didn't have an ounce of fat, and probably a male if I had to guess, but I mean, it's not like I'm trying to find, breasts or anything on this thing.
Right. And a lot of people will say that if they experience these things, they'll say, I didn't see genitalia, I didn't see breasts, but the sense I got was that it was male or that it was female. It's almost like they just have a sense of it when they see it without seeing any specific organs, if you will.
That's right. Yeah. And so from there, it just continued down the hill. Obviously my mind is racing, on all the different thoughts about this thing as much as I could piece it together then. And that would lead me on this whole quest, later after the trip. But I continued on my trip that next day, and I went down on the other side to the lakes to look around the lake shore to see if there were any footprints. I realized at that time, and this was kind of an epiphany, it took years for me to assemble this one, was that, this thing appeared within the amphitheater with me. And it was very thirsty. And if it came from like up on top of the ridge, he would have drank water up there and then kept going. He would have been on his path. But instead, it was like this thing stepped from the other world, from the other place, to come here, drank water, and, he embarked. And so the question I've always had in my head was that, did I witness where this thing stepped through some kind of a portal? Or was he just cloaked and having to stay low while I was there, while it was daylight, and he had to wait till the darkness to emerge to the audience,
Right. It's because it's almost like you were saying. I mean, you're going way out there. There's no people out there. You're kind of off the trails and off the scenic places that most people are going to go to. So, if there's a Bigfoot out there, he's going to kind of feel comfortable. At the same time, he would probably have sensed you there, smelled you, heard you. If they have these, animals, living in the woods, he should have these senses where, he knows there's a person not very far from me, making camp. He should have smelled you, should have seen you. So it's almost like, did you get that sense that he wanted you to see him?
Well, in later years, once I got the stories from the elders and I kind of pieced this together, was that what it was that I would have been like the shaman, and I would have had my encounter with this thing. I would have gained knowledge from it had I been able to sing the song, had we been able to communicate in the lingua franca that we knew. But I wasn't there. I'm like the hippie backpacker with a feather sticking out of my head, it just wasn't a fit. And so I wasn't able to take full advantage of what exactly I saw. And so instead, this guy kept rolling. And figuring stupid Americans, like this. And so I missed that opportunity. I just wasn't, I didn't have those tools. I didn't have that knowledge. And that was the thing, was that, if I had to have, the big takeaway here to your listening audience, or viewing audience, is the fact that, that these things, sometimes it seems like, and around the nation, because it would be easy for me to say, and kind of arrogant to say, well, it happened to me and that's not going to happen to you, and they don't exist in the Appalachians or the wherever's. Well, that's at all not true, because of the fact that the native lore in those areas all had these special places. And in this case, it was around a spring, and these springs can hold some amazing things. And so it's just something to know that, like, and especially where it's like, in times, in places, geographically throughout the nation, and even, the North American continent and beyond, is that, there's these sacred areas, and that basically you are in their church. And so tread lightly, do not litter, sometimes simple stuff like this, because you want to be accepted, and this is, and they're all about nature. I mean, these guys are, this is, because now you're meeting the wild heart of nature. And it's just an amazing experience. But so that was why I had to, in my book and in my thoughts and so forth like this, I placed this whole thing in a spiritual realm rather than the horror genre. And oftentimes even Native Americans, and this is shown right there at the North American Museum of Natural History there in New York, when you go in the Northwest Room, Buckwus and Zonaqua, where they dress up in skins and scare the kids, because they're going to inherit a prime clamming bed. They're going to inherit a fishing spot. They're going to inherit these things, and they don't want them to gamble it away on a stick game or some silly thing. And so to the family, they have to scare these kids within an inch of their life, so that way they understand the value of what they're going to inherit.
Right.
And so it serves as a tool, it's like the boogeyman. And so, and everybody loves the boogeyman.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's Halloween. I mean,
exactly. It's a spooky season.
Right. Yeah. And so, it's just, it ties in, even with our own culture, but in this case, did I get a visit with Jesus, and God, or the little people? And, my friend, the author of that book, just on a side story, he had a cool story for me that, so a friend of his was working at Mount Rainier National Park, maintenance guy, and he was out at a shed, like a little shed that had a motor in it or something. And this was, I think it was like early September, first snowfall up at Mount Rainier, Paradise Valley. And so he's out, fiddling with this piece of machinery, and he hears these light footfalls. Well, he looks over, look outside, and he sees this thing about 2.5 feet tall, deer legs, half like human baby body, like this. The guy freaks out. Boom! This thing takes off running, disappears into a side gully, gone like that. I mean, probably had about 4 seconds with this thing, and and that's one of the little people. And
and you hear a lot of stories about them too. I mean, it's not nearly as popular as Bigfoot, but I know, like in Massachusetts and New England, you have like the Pukwudgie. You have these, and again, if you go way back, leprechauns and fairy folk, and
right.
People do make reports of seeing small humanoids and very weird looking.
Right.
And it's hard, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this book here is all about the ones in Europe.
Okay.
And also the UK, and and we even, I mean, for whatever it's worth, to celebrate these things on a box of cereal, where they're always after me Lucky Charms, and that's the leprechaun, the little people.
Right. So very interesting. So you mentioned earlier, you kind of, when you were going into the woods, you kind of joked to yourself, oh, what if I see Bigfoot? Did you believe in Bigfoot before going out there, or is that something you always kind of just, it's on your mind? I mean, you go deep into the woods, I think anyone's going to joke about it, but a lot of people don't believe it and they'll still joke about it. So did you believe in Bigfoot before your encounter, or the encounter sort of change your mind?
I think from just because I'm a curious person and I love digging into, not only like the natural history of a place, but also its legends and lore. And the concept of Bigfoot, the Patterson Gimlin, all that activity that took place in that area there along the Klamath River. And, so I knew that I was in the general area. And it's just that I I I always had it as a question, like, does this thing exist? And but I thought, wow, what would it be like to run into one of these things? And of course, people like, to a lot of my friends in the scientific community, they're like, Greg, what mushrooms were you eating that night? you know, um, but I think, to them, it's almost like a lingering question. They just never run into anybody that had a personal encounter with it, and the thing with them, and this is where, because I can also be the largest Bigfoot skeptic in this, as far as the fact that, we still don't have any evidence. There's all of these things happening around where, like, if I was a science professor or something like that, I mean, like Jeff Meldrum, he walks a thin line there, because he wants to stay with the scientific community because that's what he is familiar with. But, I think deep down the guy believes in these things. But you see, and that also brings to the question, is it, and I think Bob Pyle said this at one time. We had him as a guest speaker at a dinner. That's Robert Pyle. He's the one that came out with the movie The Dark Divide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it had the Avett brothers in there, and he's a butterfly guy.
Right.
And the thing that he said was that, do we have a bipedal anthropoid running around the cutover forests of the Pacific Northwest, largely going unnoticed? And he gave it about an 80% that yes, we do. And I feel like, when people ask me then, do you believe in Bigfoot, or do you think this thing is, I do, but I don't think it's here all the time. And, and there was a couple of interesting things that came up here in early July. One was the advancements in science. They discovered some new particles with the Hadron Collider.
Right.
And, and this is one step closer to putting all the puzzle pieces together with dimensional theory. And so that's one. The other one was the advancements that they're learning from the James Webb Telescope, and some of these images, these images that continue to come back, and how close are we to finding a habitable planet? And then the question there is that, could they come from the habitable planet to here? Because really the two choices are that this thing's in a different dimension and can step in and out of our world as it wants to, or it comes here. This is what I played with in the book, the traversable wormhole,
right?
Traversable wormhole, this thing, just for fun, but as far as our advancements in science, I mean, right now I think we know all of about 3% of the universe, and so we've got a lot to learn.
Yeah, definitely. And that's just one of those things where science is always, wherever we are, we kind of feel like now we know everything. And then, 2 months from now, we're like, well, now we know everything. And then you discover something else, and you're like, well, okay, well, now we know everything. And yeah, I agree with you. I think we know very little about the natural world, about the universe. I mean, we know more about the moon than we know about our own oceans. So it just shows you that there's so much we don't know. And yeah, when it comes to Bigfoot, there's a lot of theories, and some people say it's an ape, and it's just an undiscovered ape. There's nothing paranormal to it. Other people believe portals. They believe it comes from another planet, and there's evidence, circumstantial evidence for all of those theories. It really just comes down to which theory do you subscribe to,
right,
based on your experience, and because there's a lot of evidence for it being a biological being. It leaves footprints. I mean, they found dermal ridges, they found hairs, that they can't exactly say it's Bigfoot, but again, all this stuff kind of adds up. But then you have these other stories where, like yours, where it just kind of seemed to come from nowhere, or hunters who have shot this thing and said, I shot this with a high caliber weapon and it didn't even blink. It didn't even seem like, and like I saw through my scope, I hit this. I couldn't have missed it. And yeah, just how, we've never found a body. We've never found, so it does make you wonder. So there's kind of enough on each side to make you say, if you subscribe to a biological natural creature, yes, we have some evidence for that. But on the other side of that, you can say, well, where is it coming from? Where does it go? It does seem to be this sort of transitory thing sometimes, where it's there 1 minute and gone the next. And then, like, where did it go? And you'll hear these stories where people will say, I followed it up the ridge and it went over the other side and I was right behind it, and then it was gone. Like, there's no way this thing could have run, it was a clear field. Or again, footprints that seem to just, people will follow footprints for a mile and it just stops in the middle of an open field. And it's like, well, where did this thing go? It didn't jump into a river. It didn't jump into a tree. It's an open field and the footprints just kind of stop dead. So it is interesting to see that there's sort of evidence on both sides to, on different sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think, also I appreciate, it was Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about how, you have an idea, you build evidence, you build a case for this, that turns it into hypothesis, then you gather more samples, more evidence, et cetera, and you build it into a theory that then becomes a fact. And so, and you can play with that in a whole bunch of different ways. But, I feel like, and yeah, there is some physical evidence. I mean, like the giants there from the Lovelock Cave were one example there in Nevada. But they hid them, or they did something with them, and so they're not on open display over there. And but also, but the thing about that is too, is it was that a Sasquatch that we see in the Northwest.
Right.
And so it's really tricky, and that's why following the scientific route, but then the thing about it is that this is the thing with science, is that you can science the hell out of this stuff and say, listen, this is physical, but then you also get belief, and that goes into Christianity, it goes into all our religions. And and what I find is I think mankind, hominids, are inherently spiritual in some degree or another. And so, and that's the thing with native peoples, is that they've had their gods and heroes for centuries, for a millennia. And similar to like our Greek, mythology, it's not that much different. And some of it gets completely far out. I mean, they got 25-foot serpents living in a lake or something like this. And, but you got to think in their world, and in their terms, how they see the world. And it, the puzzle pieces begin to fall together. It's just now we're running into this thing here and there. And, but how many times are we seeing this thing only in certain areas? I mean, it's not like they're in suburban Los Angeles.
Right.
So, and so there's, and that's the thing, is that, so the thing I would encourage your viewing audience is to, look at the native lore, look at, some of the ethnologies, and you might find some secrets in there. You might find just some clues about what you might have run into wherever you're at. I mean, one I ran across in New York, and I actually mentioned it in the book, where you've got the story of Rip Van Winkle, written by Washington Irving, and the whole thing with him getting, him helping these elves or whatever they were in carrying these casks of drink and celebrating with them, and that night would last 20 years. And Irving, wrote this up, and he hadn't visited that area of the Catskills, because he was writing, I think, from London. But an interesting thing there was that buried in the local Seneca native lore was a squirrel hunter that went out there, and he ran into what was called a Jegeo, or small people, and that night lasted over a year. And so the lore is there, and it's just for us to connect the dots on what that means and how they tie in with giants and little people. I mean, that's universal throughout the world too. So yeah,
and I think modern society has just taken us away from that. Like you're mentioning, like big cities and just getting up and go to work. Like, we're not out in nature anymore. You're not, most people are not that deep. And if they are, they're on a trail, they're on, family campground or a national park where they're sticking to a strict trail. Like, very few people go deep into the woods where people don't go.
Right.
So that I think can open up possibilities of just seeing things that most, people say, those things don't exist. And it's like, well, when was the last time you went on a hike or went camping or went into the woods? And they'll tell you, well, never. And it's like, well, how do you know? If you're just sitting in your office in the big city and you're saying, oh, Bigfoot doesn't exist, and go out there, go out and have an experience and go and just see. I mean, even if you don't see anything, just to be out in the woods and just to see the vast, especially out where you are, Pacific Northwest, where it's just huge, just acres and acres and miles of uncharted land, mapped, but like nobody's been there in years, if
Right.
ever.
Yeah, and that was also, like David Paulides in his book Tribal Bigfoot, where interviewing the tribes. I think it was the Hoopa Project. And interviewing the folks there. Well, the natives hanging around the bars and hanging around the town there. We're like, well, the thing doesn't exist. Get out of here, But yet you go talk to the berry pickers. You go talk to the people that are actually crawling around the brush out there. Gathering food. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no doubt. And that's also the same with some of the tribal elders with the little people. Down here I was talking to a Serrano elder. Little people? Oh yeah, definitely. And there's no like, well, maybe or sometimes. No, this guy was. Hey, look, I've lived here. I myself, my grandparents. I mean, going back, yeah, little people definitely. Springs in the desert. I like these little palm oases.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, yeah, go spend a year at a palm oasis. Yeah, I mean, people just don't have the time to put into it, but that's where you start running into these things, because you become part of nature. You're not above it or below it. And Tom Brown talks about that.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to get out there to experience it. You can't just sit in your house, in your apartment, and say, oh, I've never seen a UFO. Well, how often do you look up into the sky? Well, never.
Right.
Well, of
Right.
course you're not going to see one. It's not going to show up in your living room or your office at work, or you got to get out there. So I was curious, what brought you to the elders then after you had your experience to talk to them? Did you already have a relationship with them, or did that sort of grow?
No, I just fortuitously talked to one of them one time, and he opened up just a little bit. And the thing about that is all that did then was take me down the path of doing more research and digging into doctoral papers and stuff like this, where others have been able to tap into that world a little bit more. And so it was a combination of information that I was just able to kind of piece together. But normally, I mean, that's the thing about Paulides and his Hoopa project is that the elders wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. I mean, they didn't want to go near him.
Yeah.
They don't want this stuff out there, and I don't blame them because and I myself, we become almost like protectors of him, and so it's something that and I because I really really respect that. And there was actually a fellow that went out there. He was with the Society of Cryptozoological Research from New York City. And we ran into him in one trip, and they were all huddled at this place. And there was like 5 of them. And that was like, I think, his first trip out there. And then he did 2 other trips. And it was on that 3rd trip that when he returned, he comes down with an inoperable brain tumor and falls over dead in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And that was I forget it. I think it was like Grenwell or something. So the question there is that, did the little people put a hex on him he'll never forget? And this is the thing, is that because you're playing with almost like a supernatural power with these things, and I'm not worried about him, Bigfoot. I'm worried about something that stands, a foot and a half tall that, I mean, God knows what it's going to do to you, and it has that kind of power. I mean, it's, these things are very powerful and often very malevolent.
Yeah, and you hear a lot about that with the little people stories, because with Bigfoot, it's usually a fleeting glimpse. It's something, you kind of bump into it in the woods. It gives you a dirty look, or it gives you a look that says, like what you got, like, don't mess with me, don't even think about it. And then it runs off. Almost all the stories I hear about the little people, like you said, there's something malicious with them. It's almost like, they'll beckon people. They try to get them to go deeper into the woods. They speak sometimes like a weird language, but it's always kind of like this beckoning, like, come with us. almost mischievous, but also that sort of undercurrent. Everybody who comes out of it says, like, I just got a really bad feeling from
Right.
this little person. Like, it wasn't, yeah, it was cute, it was small, but it wasn't really cute, because it just had this undertone of evil, and you don't always get that with Bigfoot. Bigfoot, it's more like running into a bear. You're like, okay, it's not that the bear is evil, it's just it's dangerous, and it's an animal, and it's a wild thing, and it doesn't have an alignment per se. It's not, a criminal, it's not an evil person, but the little people, you hear that a lot, where it's just, they get like the witness will always say, I did not feel comfortable. I felt like this thing was, I was in trouble with this thing. This thing wanted to do bad stuff to me.
Yeah, I mean, they just like Bigfoot. I mean, they can be they can have a feel of it, like heavy malevolence. And the other thing with it too was that it was interesting that night, like after my encounter and after this thing dropped down the hill. I mean, I slept like a baby once I fell asleep. It took me about 3 hours, till about midnight, but I finally fell asleep. And there were no rocks thrown at my tent, no sticks thrown at me or anything like this. It was like we connected, we agreed upon, kept our boundaries, and he went that way and I stayed right where I was. And so he knew where to find me. And
Yeah, and the telepathy is interesting because that's something you hear, again, not in every case, but you do hear it sometimes, where people will say it was almost like not even a voice in their head, but almost like just like a feeling, or just like they didn't hear the words spoken, but it was they got the message.
right.
And so, like they didn't hear the words, like, don't think about it, don't even think about it, but that was what was kind of implanted in their head of just,
Right.
okay. And is that was that your experience as well?
Yes, yeah. When and the thing there is that an interesting one also is with Ron Moorhead, Sierra Sounds, and and the sounds of these things. I should mention this too, because you know I didn't think about this until I heard the actual CD. He sent me a CD, and I listened to this thing, and also watched one of his shows on YouTube. And there was one that he played that I went, I've heard that before. And I thought back, and it was like 3 years before I was up at the high mountain lake with the big peak and everything like this. Some campers had left after me. I was about 6 miles in the wilderness, in this place. Uh, took a dip, having a nice night, sipping on a beer, and I hear this boom, boom, silence, and I thought, that was the damnedest coyote I've ever heard. I never could piece it together until I heard his Sierra Sounds just like last year and went, my God, yeah, that was what the hell I heard up there. And it was like two of them were arguing, back and forth. And an interesting thing there was that was it where he was at there in the Sierras, that the natives spoke a certain language. And so I went on my linguistic maps and stuff like this that I have of native tribes, and lo and behold, that same language was also the lingua franca in the area where my encounter was, or where I heard these things.
Mhm.
And so, this is another thing that we tend not to think about. But could you imagine learning like the native Iroquois language, or whatever language you got going on there, and that the ability to communicate with these things from that language, being able to give a greeting, being able to sing a song, being able to connect with them because that language. And that's because that's what that's why, like with the little people, and the shamans, they grow a relationship. But the little people, they say, are very sad, and the reason why they're sad is because of the fact they build a relationship with the shaman, and that might last 50 or 100 years at most, and then the shaman dies, and then they got to do it with another shaman and another one, because they live 2,000 to 3,000 years. And so and that's got to be impactful. It's kind of like when you're an elder and you get up there in the years and all your friends have died, and it's kind of like, well, why don't I just go too? It's within our lifespans like that. It gets into some interesting thoughts, philosophies.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the shamans, what did they teach you about this thing, about what you saw? Did they get into it too much with you, or
No.
no?
No, not too much. No, I
Yeah.
mean, I learned, I picked up just on a couple of things that are sort of surface, but I know that, they have apprentices. I know that they participate in different ceremonies. We could call them dances or whatever like this. And the idea of that dance or that ceremony is to connect with the little people, is to basically be able to get a blessing from them saying, hey, thank you for recognizing me, thank you for the respect, like this. And they dance for 10 days straight, sweating, dancing, even sweating beforehand, cleansing, then doing the dances. And the dances represent different things, and there's different dances. And so, and they also do healing. They're like healing ceremonies too, but that's more like for a tribal member that's sick.
Mhm.
And and so and I think this is pretty universal. That's why I'm a little bit, I can share some of this, but a lot of this too is written in their lore. I mean, I have a whole book about about deerskin dances, and getting into it, like how they prepare, what they use, what they're trying to accomplish. There was a good example like on the Klamath River, and they have a book on it. It's called The Inland Whale. And in that book, what it is that a whale comes in, and dies. And what that shows to the native tribes is that the world is out of balance. And well, what was weird with that was about 12 years ago, a whale and her daughter come into the Klamath, and the whale tells the daughter, you go back to sea, you go back out, I am here to die. And the whale dies in the estuary. And to the natives, what's odd is that every other year they do a dance called the jump dance. And the jump dance is designed to rewrite the world, to basically bring the world back into order. And the whale comes in the same year as the jump dance. And so they would do the jump dance to rewrite the world because the whale showed that the world is out of order. And it was just do 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 do. I mean, how they do that, and how that's synchronized just blows my mind. And they've
Yeah.
written books on it. Mhm. Yeah.
Interesting. So did you glean any information from them about what they feel Bigfoot is or the little people are? You mentioned earlier that they're gods. Is that how the tribes see them, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why there's only certain people that can approach them, and that's why, like, even within the tribe, there's question of what are these things and what, because the shaman doesn't share this stuff smartly, and also, but that's why there's areas that are like their church, they refer to them as the forbidden zones. You don't go in the forbidden zone, and there's reasons for that. And a lot of times too, the Euro Americans have trashed those forbidden zones because we didn't even know about them. I mean, we picture a church like some building or edifice, or there's some structure we go into, whereas in this case it's just a wild area that could have a geologic change. It just, when I go up there today and I hike in there, because sometimes I hike into certain areas. I love the trails in there because they're so damn remote. That it just has it's like an energy, and you can feel it. And it can feel kind of malevolent or just heavy, like, tread carefully here, is the message I get. And, like I say, in these doctoral dissertations and some of the stuff from UC Berkeley and the anthropological library, they have a lot of the stuff buried in there. You just got to know how to dig and what to search for, and, to study their linguistics. They have a bunch of the recordings, of these medicine doctors back, 100 years ago talking, about this stuff. And they're fun, and it's very in depth.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said you've been back out there multiple times since. Did you ever have any other encounters with this thing or anything else weird out there, or was this like a one shot deal?
One shot deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, once again, did I follow a procedure that led me to that? And so I took all the right steps, and also taking the time. I mean, most of us are like, yeah, we'd love to go out in the woods. I got exactly 12 hours. Whereas nature's not on your schedule. It's kind of the other way around. And so that's the thing, is that you have to, really, really take time to soak it in. And there was an example from one of our botanists, and he was a botany professor, and he had a class out in a field area out in the mountains or whatever. And one of the assignments this gal took on was that there was a group of these lilies. There were fawn lilies, and they hadn't popped yet. And she wanted to see these things open up, greeting the spring and all this. And there was snow around, and the pond, the fawn lilies were sitting there. And she knew that she was right close to the time with which these would open. She sat there for over a week. And on the last day, she was frustrated as hell. And, why aren't these things opening up? And she walked over and she says, all right, I'll give it one last. I mean, she had her packed up and she was ready to go. And she walks over and she sat down, and about like 45 minutes later, one goes boop, and another one goes boop, 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 boop. They all open up within like 4 minutes. Done. And now these are things we don't learn because we don't take the time to learn that. So it's a really fun. I mean, once again, be patient.
Yeah, and that's you hear these stories from people, hunters or people who are hikers or campers, and they have one experience, but you have a hunter who's out there every weekend during hunting season, from dawn till dusk every weekend, and he may be 59 years old before he sees something. He will say, "Oh, I've been hunting since I was 12, and this is the first thing I ever saw, and I never saw it again after that." Right. It's really just right place, right time. You're not just the woods is not a zoo. You're not gonna go in and just see this thing. And right. I've camped in the Adirondacks a lot, and I have never seen a bear. I've never seen a deer. I've never seen a raccoon. I've seen a couple of squirrels. I've seen a couple of chipmunks, but we go deep. We go where there's really no people. We try to camp real deep, and again, but you're only spending 2 nights there. 3 days, 2 nights, and
right.
You're not just because I've never seen a deer up there doesn't mean there's no deer. Just because I've never seen a bear doesn't mean there's no bear. So it's it's important to get out there and experience these things.
Yeah. So and that's the thing, is that to be able to soak it in and imagine, like spending an entire day, night, next day in one meadow, and what's moving around, and how do they move around an area, especially where there's a spring. Springs are amazing, and especially out west where, right now we're 23 years of a drought. I've made friends with some rattlesnakes out here because I bring them water. And I don't know why I'm driven to do this, but because of the fact the area is so bone dry. And so yeah, there's this big fat red diamond rattlesnake. And what it is that you find out you can learn from them, and from there you want to dig into more knowledge about them, what they know, what they eat, what like how they habitate, what they do for the ecosystem. Like for instance, by eating a mouse, the mouse has eaten a bunch of seeds of grasses and so forth. Well, then it comes out the other end in the form of the poop that then is spread around that desert ecosystem that basically creates the ecosystem over 100,000 years. And so, and that's a contribution that the rattlesnake does. And that's why, the predators are just as important as the prey. An example of imbalance is where we see mice explosions because they killed off the coyotes, and where we get a storm that creates the grasses and the seeds that then creates an abundance of mice that then brings about hantavirus. And so, and that's why I stay out of these settlers' cabins and stuff like that, or any kind of habitation where mice are under the floorboards. And for years they've been pooping and peeing and everything else. Well, that virus is in that dust.
Right.
And so it's and that's like 72 hours, you're dead. I mean, it hits fast. CDC has that one on their list. But it's just something that, you learn this in the cycle of nature. The Navajo elders knew it, and the Navajo elders would say to the youngsters, look, if you have mice in your hogan, they are the spirits of the night. We are the spirits of the day. Though we live on the same plane of existence, you are to be kept separate. And so if you got those guys in your hogan, clean out your hogan or move, because otherwise you're going to deal with this virus. They knew that. The elders died, the younger ones don't listen. Well, okay, in that case, let's do this the old-fashioned way and have, a third of the tribe die. Gee, guys, did you learn anything there? yeah, on the North California coast, they have tsunamis, and there was one that went up to the mouth of the Trinity up the Klamath. Well, that would have been a 500-foot wave coming
Wow.
in, like making landfall. And so that's why the fishing villages are built like a couple 100 feet above, but you're thinking, well, wouldn't you put the fishing village down by the bay? No, and so it was every 300 years, 500 years, here she comes. The one 2,000 years ago that went up to the Trinity was unusual, but there's no, I mean, who dictates the size of these things? No, and this is what native tribes learn, and that's where it's like these elders, hopefully they pass this along to one another so that way the tribe survives.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So what's your theory on what you saw? What do you think Bigfoot is?
I think that just like, back around to the title of my book, Ridge Walkers in Two Worlds, that they live in two worlds. And that now of course I played with it as far as traversable wormholes, and they're on Tea Garden, and like this, and building characters with it and following all the elements of story, to make it a sci-fi book like that, because I didn't want to write it as a nonfiction. And I just felt like there was a lot of that out there, and I wanted to play with it. I wanted to have a little fun with it. But I think that they live dimensionally. That's probably the most logical, even though it's also the one that we know the least of. And that basically they have the ability to step in and out of our world. Another side point to that is that, because I have friends that either have been associated with or directly belong to, if you're familiar with the spelunking clubs called grottos, and grottos are all over the nation, and these guys know caves up and down. And and the thing about that is that it's not like those guys in the grotto say, oh yeah, I saw 3 Bigfoot run out of a cave or found some skeletons the other day. They don't run across this stuff. And so, the idea that they live in some subterranean whatever, I just don't think is happening. We're not finding the evidence. And
So do you think that they have the ability to purposefully come through dimensions, or do you think it's more of like an accidental thing?
I think it's purposeful, and I also think that there's probably a timing to it, like on blue moons or some time. And then that begs another question too: is it, how long are they here for? A day, a month, a year? I think they're here for maybe a month. And the thing I saw, could this thing go to some to some mountain range 100 miles away easily? Probably be there in 2 days or less. Similar to like when you look at the range of a timber wolf or a gray wolf. I mean, they can probably range that far, and that's where people are running into them. Where it's like, God, I saw him run across the road, or the question that I have is that, did I see this thing's origin? Did I see where its point of where it steps into our world, and he's on his way, and where he goes, and and he might have certain places he goes to because of the fact of once again going around what the shamans are doing, and also that it's that interconnectivity between little people, shaman, Bigfoot would be like Jesus, little people like God, shaman, human, like this. And so, and they're probably not hardwired to just that. I mean, there's probably other things happening there, but I think the shaman's kind of a little part of that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
We will never know.
We'll never know. Well, it's a
Yeah.
very interesting story, Greg. I appreciate you sharing it with us. And is there anything else you want to plug while you're here? I know you got your books on sale now on Amazon, on your website. I'm going to put links for everybody in the show description. But
Okay, good. Yeah, and it's something that I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. I mean, I have a whole reference library of this material. If folks want to contact me, I may as well just give out my regular email, which is gwalter2017 at Gmail, and gwalter WALTER 2017 at Gmail. And because sometimes I feel like where I could help folks that are really interested in this, or especially where like they've had an encounter, is to like be able to have some start points on how to reference their local ethnographies, and some of the stories that are from the tribes, from their area, where they where they see these things and what happened. And that's kind of where the magic of you come in, is as far as them articulating that story, and then obviously being able to dig deeper, to have those tie-ins as to what the possibilities of this thing, why it was there, and like this.
Right, definitely. So you're welcoming people to contact you if they have questions, if they have experiences, if they want to talk to you. Awesome. That's great of you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm also on Facebook, Greg Walter, author. Ridge Walkers in Two Worlds and the Ridge Walkers. And so, when I try to circulate on and off there, I haven't been on there too much because I've been involved in other projects, here, but yeah, this one's just been a really fun one. And, I plan to tell other stories of my family's lives just because of the crazy stuff they did in the military.
Yeah.
So, that kind of dates back, 100 years or so.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to that.
All right. Thank you.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed your story, and I'll put links to all your stuff in the description below, so people will be able to find you. And I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Make it a great day out there.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I want to thank Greg Walter for coming on the show. He's the author of Ridge Walkers in Two Worlds. He shared with us his Bigfoot experience from the mid-90s back over there in Oregon, the Northern California border. Really interesting story, very, very quick sighting, but very interesting that he had some telepathy, saw this thing drinking. So it's interesting that this thing can cross dimensions, apparently, but also needs a drink of water. So very interesting stuff. We'll never really quite know what this all means, but interesting to hear stories from different sides of the aisle. I'm more of the biological, this is an undiscovered ape theory, but Greg seems to think these things are interdimensional, and that's fine by me. Everybody's got their theories. None of us know for sure. So all we can do is kind of pick our sides and be open to hearing other people's stories. Tonight I'm drinking, this is from Treehouse. This is Simple Life. It's an Imperial Milk Stout. I'm not getting paid for this. I just love Treehouse beers, and I just thought it was appropriate for tonight because it's got a little tent in the woods with a campfire. No Bigfoot on there, but it's very good beer. Imperial Stout, very tasty. So, shout outs to everybody. Josh, Scott, thanks for watching, guys. My dad, Gary, and my son, Jake. Christy, I know you're trying to catch up on the podcast, Christy Nelson Keating. And we'll see you guys next week. I'm going to put links to all of Greg's contacts, his email, where you can buy his book, his Facebook, his Instagram. All that's going to be in the description below. So make sure you check him out. If you do have questions for him, he was very generous and gave us his email, so you can reach out to him. And we'll see you guys next week.